potting and all that.
It's showtime.
Ladies and gentlemen, your host for tonight's show.
Here's Josh Salmon.
Josh Salmon with you on a very special episode of the Salmon Says Podcast. I'm joined by Grand Island, Nebraska hip hop artist Upset, talking about his new album, Cycle of Mankind, coming out March 8th. First of all, thanks for coming in. Where are we going to be able to find this album when it comes out? All right, newest album called Disciple of Mankind comes out March 8th. First of all, where can we find it? Where's it going to be available once it comes out?
So once it comes out on March 8th, it'll be available on all digital platforms, such as Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, are usually the three main ones.
Cool.
Pandora, basically all the platforms.
Yeah.
Deezer is like another one, but the three main ones that people use are Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube.
Okay.
And iTunes, I guess you could say.
Album originally supposed to come out in 2020. Pandemic, world kind of stopped. Mm-hmm. You decided to hold off a couple years after that, though, and release it. Why now? Why doing it now?
Yeah, that's a good question. It was so when everything kind of geared up to do it in 2020, and then as you know, like you said, everything changed in the whole world.
Sure.
Live music itself shut down for 7 months, and that was the longest stretch since I started performing that I went without doing any shows. So
right.
I was chomping at the bits to get back on stage once the reopen happened.
You only do so much at the house.
And, yeah, I can only rap in my garage so much.
Right.
You know what I mean? So. I was doing that during the COVID time to kind of stay sharp on my performance.
Sure.
So when I did hit the stage, we were ready. Once the reopen happened, I think for me, it was going that time without performing. That was my main focus, was like, I'm going to book every show I can, perform my heart out to every... Because one thing that COVID taught us, I think, everybody a lot, but... For me, just as a performing aspect, is that, every show's not, a given. Every day is not a given.
Sure.
And so you really almost treat every show like it's your first and your last one, And so I also wanted to just get out and start performing. So once we started doing that, it was more of like just staying booked. And then I loved the project, the album project as a whole. But at the time, once that happened, I just decided to kind of start releasing singles off of it.
Okay.
And just kind of a little sample taste size kind of thing, And then, but I've always liked what that full project was. And so I always fully intended to do it. And I think a lot of it was either just personal stuff happening in life, or just a lot of it was maybe overthinking some of the small details, like album cover, album title. I went so many times of what to call it and everything like that. And so kind of last year, it was a very busy year performing, and we stayed really booked with doing shows like State Fair and here, Grand Island and stuff. But last year, I actually wanted to bring out the album and just kind of ended up running out of time. So going into this year, I wanted that to be kind of my first big thing I did this year.
Okay.
And part of it is to, I guess you could say, kind of pave the way for music that I've made since. That's going to be coming out, and it's kind of some of the new stuff I've been recording to kind of help get that project out, and then hopefully the goal would be to have some of my newer songs and new releases to follow that.
How many albums have you done?
Well, technically, I did Let the Battle Begin was like my first main studio album. Okay. I have 2 other studio albums that have never been released yet, and so
one release,
technically this would be my 4th, but second one that I'm actually releasing.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah,
I have a lot of unreleased music that I still feel is very important when I wrote it and relevant to now, that I want to eventually get out. Yeah.
Do you produce most of your own music? Do you mix it?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
So on some of the tracks, I've made the beats or did the production. I'm very involved with the mixing and mastering processes. Usually, whatever engineer's working on it, I'm right there with them. I'm trying to learn more stuff as far as the engineering side of it and the technical side of making the music sound really good. But this album in particular was mostly largely produced by Mario Quadrone.
Okay.
He goes by the name Mario on the mix, and he's also like the executive producer for the album. He didn't make every beat on the album, but I would say about 80%.
Okay.
And he did all the mixing and mastering. He was the engineer for the album as well. Yeah.
Awesome.
But I also do some of my own stuff as well. Like Let the Battle Begin, that album, I made every beat on that one.
Well, as a musician myself, I know, we used to rehearse songs, and in our head, we put it out, okay, that's how we performed it. But sometimes we got in the studio, we're like, well, we kind of want to tweak it this way. Let's see how this works, and throw it against the wall and see what sticks. And sometimes I'd add in, little extras, and so sometimes that happens too.
The creative process changes once you are in the studio. Maybe something comes up, you go, oh, this sound would sound cool in there. Or it's always, to me, it's funny because I've told this to people too, that it's always like small details, right?
Yeah.
Like stuff that you don't know if it's gonna stand out or not, but one little sound effect that you add might change the dynamic of that song.
And you can do things in the studio you can't do live on stage.
Right. You only have, live, you only have so many musicians up there.
Right.
And so many sound effects that can be made. So, in the studio, when you're, like, working on stuff, I've done that before, too, where I've just added so much to a song to where I get away from how it originally started.
Sure.
And go, okay, maybe,
it can be good
maybe dial it back a little bit
Yep.
and keep it where it's at. So, it's a thin line, I think, between, what I want to say, spicing something up in the studio to maybe too much stuff.
Sure.
You can mud it down a little bit, and also promoter with some of the shows.
So do you have live band then when you perform?
Most of the time, some of the shows I do. The bigger events will have the live band behind me.
It's just you and an open mic or something, then it'd be...
Yeah, and then I have a bass player, guitar, drummer, and another additional vocalist kind of helping me doing some backup stuff.
Of that,
and just like hype, man, like basically getting the flow of the energy going and stuff like that. But I would say for events such as here at Grand Island and Nebraska State Fair, I have the live band behind me on that. Yeah.
But sometimes it is just you and a track
sometimes
or
just
something.
me and the beats. Yeah.
Okay. That's nothing wrong with that. That's done both ways.
I just going back to it. I think that that the project itself is a great project and needs to be heard. And like I said, I want to get more music out to the following that I've been able to build in the last 4 or 5 years, and start putting out a lot more music this year. I think that's one of my main goals is to release more music this year. There's things that I'm working on now and songs that I'm writing now, I think, so for some of my future projects coming out, that I think will address some of the loss a little bit more than what is in this album.
Sure.
There's definitely some life situations that I talk about in this album, but, some of those songs were wrote after becoming a father and stuff like that. So there's a song about my daughter on there.
Yeah.
There's a song about relationship stuff with my wife and everything too. And but I think some of the loss that I occurred is more reflective in the music I'm currently writing.
Sure.
That hopefully will see the light of day. Hopefully sometime soon as well.
Yeah, I remember too, releasing albums, you're like, God, I hope this is going to be good, too.
Yeah, I mean, you just never know.
You throw it out there and you're like, well, some are going to like it, some aren't, but...
And I think artists and myself and other artists, I think we try not to get caught up in that. You want to release stuff that if you feel good about it, then you want to release it and not really worry about what everybody else's perception is. But in the back of our mind, that's always going to be there.
Yeah.
I think an artist or a musician gets in their own head sometimes about was that a good show? Did people really enjoy it? And I always go back to if you feel like you practiced hard and you performed your best, then you did your part. It's up to music's always gonna be subjective, so it's up to the masses to decide if they like your music or not.
Yeah, you gave your all, so that's a win to you.
Yeah, exactly. As long as I'm putting forth the effort and focusing on what it is I want to do moving forward, and knowing that I put my heart and soul into it, then I feel confident enough to release it. There might be some people that like it and some that don't, and that's just going to be the world that we live in. So
there used to be a saying that says, any publicity is good. Who was just some of your influences? Obviously, hip hop. There's a lot of directions.
Oh yeah, there's so many influences with hip hop, starting at a younger age. I was always influenced by the writing of Tupac Shakur.
Sure. Yep.
Just felt like, his songs really told a story and were about a lot of real life stuff, and just the words he was using is very poetical. Wu-Tang Clan was another big influence of mine, just because of their whole dynamic of how they were a group of 9 members, but everyone kind of took their space for that song.
Yeah.
There might, on the whole project, there might be only 4 or 5 of them on one song, but it always involved them. I felt like one thing about Wu-Tang that was really cool is they all had solo careers, but at the end of the day, it was about the branding of Wu-Tang and the collective. DMX was another one that I love. DMX, love Nas.
Yeah.
Some of the, I guess, what would be known as like more old school rappers now, but because of time and everything. But I really feel like during that era, to me, always felt like the golden age of rap, where like I felt like the lyricism was just stronger back then. The poetic side of it, the storytelling, I felt. And that's not saying anything about any music now or anything.
That was like late 90s, early 2000s. I was in college when a lot of that stuff came out.
Yeah, I was also influenced by a lot of rock music as a kid, too. One of my favorite bands forever was, and still is, was Guns N' Roses.
Okay.
As a kid, it was hard not to be like, what is this, Metallica was always a band I respected so much for, not just for the music they made, but their longevity and the way they've been able to stay together all these years.
Have you met any big rappers or performers at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I've met a lot of artists. I've done a lot of shows with big artists. The ones I've actually met personally was like a couple members of Bone Thugs and Harmony. So
cool.
It was Crazy Bone and Wishbone. Oh yeah, and going back to the early influences, they were one of my big early influences too. Bone Thugs and Harmony. The first thing I ever tried freestyling on was a Crossroads instrumental, actually.
Oh, that's
so
cool.
Huge shout out to Bone too, because like without me trying to rap for my very first time, because a buddy was like, just try it. That was a huge influence on me too. Bone Thugs and Harmony was always one of my top groups.
I like that. Yeah.
So just wanted to make that in there too. But I've met a couple of the members from Bone. I've met Twista and a couple of his producers. Legendary Trackster. Yeah, that's who it was. Okay. He was really cool. When we did the show with Twista, what I didn't know is that they had a direct feed in their trailer for everything that was on stage, and so we were before them. And with the band, kind of going back to this, at that time I was in a band called Mankind, which the album title kind of tiles that in as far as like a paying homage to like my first band. And we were on stage performing, and I didn't know that they had an in-ear to hear everything on stage, so they heard our whole performance. And after the show, I knew who he was. Everybody obviously was surrounding Twista,
Yeah.
He was kind of chilling, and another guy, and they're just doing their thing. I don't think anybody really it's kind of before social media was as big as it was, and people probably heard all his music but didn't know what he looked like, and I knew I was like, that's him,
Yeah.
And so I just walked up, and I think I said something like, I cheers the beer to him or something like legendary,
Yeah.
And I started talking to him. He's very, very cool, very humble guy. Very, very encouraging, motivating. But he actually told us that he had they could hear us on stage, and it gave him, it was crazy getting compliments from like,
that's cool,
one of my, heroes or legends. I'm thinking, wait, he's telling me that we were good? I came to tell him how awesome they are, So I thought that was really cool. One of the coolest artists that I've ever done a show with as well. I've met a lot of really cool artists in the industry, and big name artists, but Spice One is another one that was a old school rapper, if you will. Goes way back. He's from the Bay Area out there in Cali, and really was big and popular in the 90s, and still is known as a legend in the game. I did a show with him in Omaha, and was fortunate enough to have a good conversation with him. And just as far as an artist, I mean, he was all about his fans. He was meeting people, talking to them, shaking hands, signing autographs, just like, kind of like when all of us artists show up to a show and we're all networking together. Sometimes the bigger artists kind of roll in later when they're booked and stuff, and that's totally understandable. Yep. But I mean, he was there throughout pretty much the night and just really getting to know his fans and stuff like that. So I thought that was really cool.
Good deal.
I played pool with the Yin Yang Twins.
Oh yeah,
a long time ago when I did a show with them. They were just kind of hanging out before the show, and got fortunate enough to play some pool with them.
That's
so
cool.
There's moments like that have always been really cool.
How many shows have you done? And let's say in 2024, how many shows did you do?
Just in that year?
Yeah.
Last year was probably. I'd have to look, but I know it was right around 25 to 30.
Oh, wow. So,
yeah, we stayed pretty busy last year. But I try not to overbook either because, like I said, I'm still a family man. Still got, a lot of stuff that I need to hold down, here in my hometown. But I try to at least do 1 or 2 a month.
Yeah.
And sometimes it just depends on how it works out. Sometimes I might get opportunities presented to me that are all in 1 month or spread out through 3 or 4 months. So I'd say around at least 25 last year. If I had to say, I don't really have a certain number, but total from when I first started performing, it would have to be over 300, maybe like 400 probably shows in my life.
Wow.
At least 400 probably.
That's a lot more than I've done, but I've done several. But
in 2019, before all the stuff happened and everything, but in 2019 is probably my busiest year. I think I did over 50 some shows that year, just in that year.
Yeah.
But I would say other than that, it's probably around at least an average of 25 or so a year is usually what I do.
I think back to the 60s, 70s, 80s when there was no internet and how hard it was to get discovered, first of all.
Yeah.
And second of all, how hard it was to push your music. I mean, it was all record companies then. Now you do it yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, look at Bieber. He came off of YouTube and now he's, So, I mean, it's all about promoting yourself. So you obviously do a lot of that yourself. And obviously there's going to be some brick walls. You're going to hit some walls. Some people are going to be like, oh yeah, this is just another guy. Sometimes there's going to be like, hey, we'll give this guy a try, and talk about that experience a little bit. You're promoting yourself. It's tough. I mean, you're your own guy.
I think you make 2 really good points. I think in years past, like you said, before there was as much social media and promotion, I think it made it really hard for bands to not only get discovered, but harder to kind of promote that in a way. But I think then it wasn't as, and I'm not saying necessarily saturated.
Sure.
I just think there was less people trying to become artists or make it in the music industry. Maybe then, I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, it could be the same now. Like you said, with the DIY type industry that we're in, where artists can be their own labels, artists can be their own promoters, artists can be their own producers. There's more technology available at an artist's fingertip now to where you don't always need the huge studio to make a good sounding product. A lot of artists can do it on their own these days. It still helps, I think, with a label, like having that big marketing and promotional push.
Sure.
I think that's what's hard for artists is to get that kind of budget and funding to kind of be able to put their music out there even more. But I think right now is also an amazing time for artists and the art form itself of music because of those things. So now, like I said, you don't depend on the industry machine as much as I think artists in the past did, and now artists can do a lot of those things for themselves. But like you said too, it does take that work and that time to say, okay, to be an artist these days, an independent artist at that. You're more than just the artist. Now, all of a sudden, you're the artist, you're the content creator, you're the one that's controlling and running your own promotional pages. You're the one that is possibly setting up the shows. You're the one that could be doing the production.
All the legwork.
You could be the ones producing, engineering. Yeah, you're doing 8, maybe 9 different jobs.
Sure.
And a lot of that, I think, the time involved in that, it inadvertently takes away time from being the artist. It'd be nice sometimes to just be able to sit down, write the song, and put it out.
Okay, here you go.
What's that?
The talent's going to speak for itself.
Right, and I think
there's a lot of bad singers out there, and if they're bad, they're going to get discovered. If they're good, then they're good like you.
Hey, man, I appreciate that, and I that kind of gets to my next point. I think that the good music still will rise above the grouping of like everybody in the same pack, right? But I also think that there's a lot of good artists and a lot of talent out there that has yet to be discovered. It is like what you said. I think can't remember the numbers behind it, but something around hundreds of thousands of songs released every day to Spotify.
Yeah.
So it's easy to just fall in the mix of everyone else's stuff, you know.
Right.
It's easy to get lost in that saturation, if you will.
Yeah.
But I think that overall, good music will always, I think, rise up no matter what genre it is.
Yeah.
You know, when it sounds good to the ear, it sounds good, and people are gonna want to get behind that and stuff like that. So it's definitely a tough industry and a tough game to play, where you're trying to rise above the rest of that.
Oh yeah.
But a lot of what I do is focus more on like, how can I become better on my own instead of trying to compete with anyone, or like, oh, they're doing this, I'm gonna do that. Like, I don't want to. I'm not in it to compete with all the other artists out there. I'm looking in the mirror saying like, how do I become better this year than I was last year? Pretty much, you know.
That leads me to my next question. I remember doing a show one time, and I used to be in a Christian band. It was me and another guy.
Oh, cool.
And we wrote our own songs. I produced the albums. We put them together. Did shows just around Lincoln and stuff. And we had somebody come up to me, one of my closest friends, who he's kind of borderline. He believes in God, but he never went to church, that kind of thing. He came up to me after the show and he's like, God, you guys really reached me tonight. He's like, you really touched me. Have you had that moment? Have you had that aha moment where after somebody reaches you after a show and you're just like, man, I'm supposed to be doing this?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's been, and I'm glad you brought that up too, because as an artist, you know, and just as a person in general, you want, how I'd say, it's not that you seek that validation from people if you feel like you're doing the right thing. I mean, I think that, you know, a lot of us, it just goes with being an artist, that you're always going to kind of like, have that self-consciousness, or like think about it. Yeah, if you don't get to a certain level by a certain amount of years, you might start feeling like, am I supposed to be doing this? Is this the right path for me? So when that's like, when you get that like confirmation and it's reconfirmed to you from just the average person, that feels so amazing. And I have had that happen quite a few times, where somebody might have came up to me after a show with like a tear in their eye, or say, hey, that song meant so much to me. You have no idea what you were saying in that I really relate to, because you just never know what somebody's going through, you know, and how you can relate to people like that is amazing. And, you know, I've had people come up to me and compare me to Eminem and, you know, just other artists in the game. And, you know, to me, it's just like, wow, you know, like, I love that comparison.
And in that same breath,
and also kind of like, damn, that's some big shoes to fill, you know, like, like, but at the same time, just for someone to even say that the show that I just put on was that amazing to them, they compare me to bigger artists, or like, back when I was with Mankind, sometimes we'd get compared to like Linkin Park when they were rolling, you know, and doing, and so just like, not just the comparisons of other famous artists, which is always humbling, but it's also kind of like, I love just being like, that's cool comparison, but I want to focus on, I don't want to be the next this or that, I want to be the first me, you know. But yeah, or like somebody is saying, hey, I really relate to that song, or even somebody right there in the front row just completely dancing to it and throwing their hands there and like feeling it with their whole body, you know, like that type of stuff is very motivating and inspirational to me, you know. I think that a lot of times, you know, we're the ones that are motivating and inspiring a crowd, but just the average person can motivate us on stage so much more, you know.
Right.
It's
for
crazy.
me, music comes and goes, but great music lasts forever. It's timeless.
Absolutely.
So you think of songs, you know, that were written in the 50s or 60s that still resonate today, that are still true, and people can look at a song and be like, man, that's still relevant, even in 2024.
Yeah.
And so good songs do that. And so, you know, that's to me, that's what music is. There's a lot of songs out there, and there's a lot of good artists that did a lot of bad songs. But the great songs will stand the test of time. Do you hope 20 years, 30 years down the road, somebody picks up an Upset album and goes, man, you know, I remember this back in the day. Maybe they were going through something at that time when they first heard the song.
Right.
Or you get a new kid that just listened to it for the first time. You know, you're 60 years old, and they pick this up, and they're like, hey, what's this? And they listen to it and like, man, this still is relevant today.
Yeah.
I mean, is that something you keep in the back of your mind, or just let the music talk for itself?
I think during the process, I don't think I think about it like that necessarily.
Sure.
But absolutely, in a way too, like, yeah, that's kind of what I'm going for too. Like, I want that. I want that to not only somebody to hear my music later on in the future, or like you said, years from now, and still say, wow, he was really saying some cool stuff on this album, or I still like this music. but not just about what I'm saying, but just the music itself to like still be relevant to that time. And like you said, I feel like a lot of the songs I have put out will be listened to years from now, and maybe even after I'm gone and stuff like that.
There's going to be new fathers. There's going to be people
there's going to be people that I think can relate to the stuff.
Right.
And one track in particular, "Beautiful Girl," that I wrote for my daughter. Mm-hmm. I feel like there will be a lasting legacy with that song through her and through my family. That it's kind of cool and thinking of it now is that she's able to grow with this song, right? Yeah. Maybe by the time she's 20, she's gonna be sick of it,
right?
And it's like, don't play that song no more. I've heard it a million times, right? But I think it's cool too that she's gonna know that I didn't write that song for anyone else besides her.
Yeah.
I wrote it for her, and so if other people can appreciate it and relate to it, then that's just like a bonus add-on on that,
Well, maybe some dad will be like, hey,
I want to play this for my daughter,
right.
yeah.
And that's cool too, right?
Yeah, absolutely,
definitely.
Man. Absolutely.
You see father-daughter dances at weddings and stuff.
Yeah, and stuff like that. And I just think that, I think hopefully what I can hope for is that even years later, people could hear the music and know that I was putting my heart and soul into it and that I was storytelling about real life stuff,
Okay, there is a little bit of parental advisory. Obviously, hip hop kind of has that.
Yeah.
But that's normal. What is the general message you want to send out to people? This will be our last question here. What's the general message you want your fans to take away from your music?
Well, I think if anyone's followed me this far, that they'll see that the future is bright of what I'm trying to do and gonna continue to do. I think the album itself has an overall message about growth. Human growth as far as a personal growth, as far as like how some of the first songs are to how it ends, is you can kind of sense that like I was a little more wild before I had my daughter. Yep. Some of those earlier songs reflect that, to where as it ends it's kind of more about the family bonding and unit there.
So not only how you've matured as a person, but your music has matured with you.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that one thing I want the public to know, even if it's somebody that's never heard my music and hearing it for the first time, is that how do I say it? Just like a tenacious spirit that will not give up, will always continue to keep pushing forward at all costs. Somebody that basically let outside things affect me as far as like, how do I say it? Like, you always have a plan A and plan B. I'm always going to try to figure it out and always going to try to continue chasing a dream, pursuing a dream, Do
you want people to take your music and make it think that, hey, he wants me to find my best me and be my best me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that safe to say?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And I think with an aspect of like, this is a good time, or like, I want people to have fun while listening to music and not, it's like a thin line. Like, I want them to take it serious, but not too serious to where, they're not having fun either. Yeah. So
be sentimental, but enjoy it.
Absolutely, man.
All right, folks, there it is. You heard about it. Cycle of Mankind, coming out March 8th from Upset, the man, the myth, the legend. Download the album March 8th from all major platforms, and check this guy out live. He gets a heck of a show. Thanks for coming on, man.
This has been a presentation of Salmon Says Media. Copyright 2025.